I really do want to know, what are some of the answers that you've heard to questions that you go, that is just a really, really bad answer? I would love to eventually cover some more bad answers as we get into this. Chad, unmute yourself and tell me, how in the world are you doing up there in Ohio tonight?
I am doing great. I sold some jet skis last year and switched it out to a boat. So I have been boating all 3 days, last 3 days. I'm a little sore from water skiing, and my new boat, my 1995 boat, new to me. It's got the ability to produce a surf behind. So we've been learning how to surf. I've got a special needs son, as you know. So I got a little bit bigger surfboard. And so he and I have been surfing together. So we get on the back of the boat, scoot off, and we've been surfing together. So that's been a lot of fun.
You can get Quinn to surf.
Well, I also downhill ski with him, 3 times a week between my legs. He's 11 years old. I've been doing it for 6 years, and my back, went from being, all the way leaned over for 5 years and getting some back therapy to now he's tall enough that he still doesn't listen real well. Again, he has autism, so he's got, he's developmentally like a 1.5-year-old. So, yeah, we've gotten up on skis a couple times too. I have him stand on my skis against my chest, but he weighs like 70 pounds now, so I got to work on some muscles.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy. 11 years old, he's getting big, and you're literally, I mean, when I see the videos on Facebook that you post of him, The Adventures of Mr. Quinn, that's impressive. It really is impressive. Well, good job.
Well, thank you.
Hey, shout out to Tony, who's saying hey to me in the chat. Mr. Smiles, love you, buddy. Hope you're doing well. John, how you doing? Thank you for joining me tonight. Really, really appreciate it. I want to get into some things that I don't ever want you guys to say. They're terrible answers. And if you listen to this, you go through this webinar, and I catch you saying it online, I need to give you a little slap back and forth online for going, why would you say that? That's a terrible answer. I know most of you have probably heard some really bad answers and can get pretty frustrated at Christians for saying certain things when you're like, no, please don't say that. Please don't communicate, God like that, or the Bible like that, or Christianity like that. So we're going to hit a couple of them tonight. Chad, you've been a pastor for, wow, how long have you been a pastor? 20?
Well, really full-time, probably, 25 years. But prior to that, obviously always involved in ministry since the time I was 14, 15. And just really, God came to know Jesus when I was 2 or 3 years old. My parents, I'm like, come on, Mom, 2 years. She's like, you did. And so I've just really had a neat story of how God's grace drew me, and my parents, your aunt and uncle, just great examples of faith and genuineness. And so, yes, I've always been surrounded by faith and God and the Bible, and my parents both really made it come alive. So I've been a pastor full-time, though, for 26 to 30 years, depending on if you count part-time, full-time.
And as a pastor for that long, have you ever heard some really bad answers from people?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I mean, I've given bad answers and had to go research them before. I've heard bad answers. I've heard Christians on television give bad answers, and I want to throw something at the television. I've been in seminars where people gave bad answers. So, yeah, so I'm really passionate about this topic, too. And I'm also interested in humility, because sometimes better to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you, than to pretend you know something you don't. You sound like an idiot. So, and again, guilty as charged. I've done that.
Me too. And that's actually the last one we're covering for tonight, is don't make something up. So we're going to get to that. I have failed in that area as well. Hey, question number 1, I want to ask, and I'll let you guys guess what I think the bad answer is that people give. So if you put it in the chat and you guess, you are going to be the winner of 5 points that are good for nothing, but they're yours to keep if you get the bad answer for this one, okay? So in the chat, here's the question that I want to start with tonight. Why do people go to hell? Whoa, starting off just like that. Why do people go to hell? What is the bad answer? The one that you go, no, don't say that. And if you don't know, just don't type anything, okay? What's the bad answer? Why do people go to hell? Chad, you've probably had to deal with this in quite a bit, haven't you?
Sure. I'll tell you a story. A lot of times I will have people of different faiths come to my church, and they'll interview me for 40 minutes. And so I let them just ask me their hardest questions. So I've had Buddhists in there. I've had atheists in there. I've had just general skeptics in there. One time I
And
had,
by the way, this is by your invitation. You're inviting them in to put you
yeah,
on the hot seat. Yeah.
yeah, and it's not really like a debate as much as it is, hey, why don't you ask me your toughest questions, and I'm going to try and give you, the most thought out answer I can. So I had a dialogue with a guy who was an Orthodox rabbi, and we just had a great conversation about Israel and Jesus, and is Jesus the suffering Messiah, and all those different questions from Isaiah 53. And so we get done talking, and pretty much the whole time, sort of classic example of good works versus grace. He's telling me what a good person he is, and I'm telling him what a bad person I am. So we get to the end. I got 2 minutes left. I'm like, well, thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate you being here today. He looks at me and says, well, can you tell me this? I said, well, I'll try. What? He says, do you think I'm going to hell? I'm looking up at the clock. I'm like, I got 90 seconds, right? I said, and I'll tell you a little
You're
bit.
telling a rabbi whether or not he's going to hell.
Yeah. And again, one of the secrets to answering a good question is you got to look at the issue behind the issue. So the issue behind the issue is he believes if I say yes, I'm being incredibly unfair, right? And I'm a judgmental person. So I tried to answer the question by answering the issue behind the issue and still being theologically correct. So here's my answer. I said, well, at the end of our life, there are two choices. Now, he thinks I'm going to say heaven or hell, but I'm not going to say that. I said, at the end of your life, you have two choices, either forgiveness or fairness. God says you can either get a fair trial where everything good you've done is evaluated and everything bad you've done is evaluated, and God gives you a fair trial. Or for those of us who think, oh my goodness, my good deeds aren't nearly as good as I think they are, and my bad deeds are far worse than I imagine they are, I do not want a fair trial. Now, immediately I reframe the debate, so no longer can he frame it as Chad's unfair. I just told you, God's going to be fair. And if you want a fair trial, and you've told me for the last 30 minutes you want a fair trial because you're such a good person, you're going to get that fair trial you asked for. And what does Romans 2 tell us? That you are evaluated based on your own conscience, right? Your own conscience is your moral standard. And at the end of life, what could be more fair than God saying, I'm going to take your definition of right and wrong, and I'm going to apply it to you and see how you did. I mean, what's more fair than that? And so I said, so at the end of your life, you get 90 seconds. Forgiveness or fairness, and that's what happens at the end of your life. He says, well, if that's true, then why are you trying to tell me about Jesus? I said, well, honestly, I don't think you're going to do very well in that trial. I don't think you do very well in that fair trial, and I'm just trying to share with you that maybe you need some forgiveness because I know I'm not going to get in the fair trial. And he went, oh, okay. Now, in one sense, it reinforced his self-righteousness because he thought he was going to make it, but it was a way to reframe the debate so I didn't have to talk about obscure issues. I could go right for the gospel. What is the gospel? Fairness, not what we want, or forgiveness.
That is a great way. And, the way you just answered that reminds me of the way the late Ravi Zacharias would answer questions. He always got to the issue behind the question, and that is brilliant. I don't remember hearing that answer before of the way to do it. I remember watching that message, but I guess that didn't register to me what you were doing to answer the issue behind the issue. So
what you want to do, if you think about Romans 1, Romans 1, what you're trying to do is you're trying to actually appeal to someone to show they already have evidence. And so using the Socratic method to do that, what do you already know about God, Romans 1, and then you're trying to appeal to somebody's Romans 2. They're not going to listen to me. They're not listening to the Holy Spirit. I'm trying to get them to listen to their own conscience. And their own conscience is, well, do you think it's good to gossip about people? Do you want people lusting after your wife or people lusting after your sister or your daughter? No. Well, me neither. By the way, have you ever lusted after anyone else's daughter or anyone else's wife? Oh. So then I don't have to pull out the Bible. I'm thinking Romans 2, but I'm actually using Romans 2 to get the person's own conscience to go, wow, I got a problem. And when you realize you have a problem, you're no longer your own justifier. And then you start moving from self-righteousness to Jesus' righteousness, which is, I got a problem. I need someone to cover up the mess I've made of my own thoughts, mind, or secrets, or conscience. So
that's similar to what Paul did on Mars Hill when he's talking to the unbelievers. He starts with what they know, starts with where they're at, and takes them from there. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, on this question, why do people go to hell? I believe as John said, sorry, the name is hidden on me here, because God sends them there. And he says that is the bad answer. And I think, John, you're hitting on basically what I want to say. People say they're going to hell because God is a mean God. God just wants to send people there. or even the phrase, they're going to hell for rejecting Jesus. They're not going to hell for rejecting Jesus. The Bible makes it very clear. Why is it that there is a judgment? And as Chad said, you can either have fairness or forgiveness. The fair trial says God's going to judge you based on your deeds. And what does the scripture clearly say? All have
Sin.
we've all sinned and come short of the glory of God. So why is it that we deserve a punishment? It's because of sin. It's not necessarily, and the atheists like to kind of couch it in a different way. They say, oh, so if somebody rejects Jesus, that's why they go to hell. No, it's because of our sin that we deserve judgment. Chad, how would you tackle that one?
Well, again, I'm in Romans 2 again, which it says that, Jews who have the law are judged by the law, and Gentiles who don't have the law are not judged by the law. So it is inherently unfair when somebody hears you say that somebody's going to be evaluated by something that they never heard before. And that's behind the issue of the classic, how does the person who's in the third world country has never heard about Jesus? And that's why I think Paul does such a masterful job of addressing this in Romans 1 and 2. You're going to be judged by creation. You're going to judge by your own conscience. If you didn't grow up with Jesus or the Bible, you're not going to be judged by that. And Paul says, and just those things alone, we're all going to stand without excuse. So I go at that issue, which is remind people, hey, what could be more fair than using your definition of righteousness to judge you? Okay, how would you do? And then in 2 sentences, I'm already talking about the gospel. I also think the issue is there's a lot of misconceptions about hell. I mean, there's a word hell in the Greek-Roman world. There's a word hell, which was Sheol, the place of death in Hebrew. There's kind of the modern idea that hell is a lake of fire. So we know theologically no one's in the lake of fire right now, right? Because hell is thrown into the lake of fire in Revelation after the great white throne judgment. Why? Because no one gets punishment until they get a fair trial. So I think people already bring so much misconception and preconceived ideas to the table. You almost got to untangle all that first. I did a talk on hell 2 years ago because we were in that passage where Jesus talks about Lazarus and the rich man. I spent 40 minutes on that topic, and the first 60% was an argument for why a just place of judgment is actually a good thing. And so I think you have to really come at really building a case for this as to why it's important, why it keeps you from revenge, why if evil isn't punished, and also the idea that the Bible's clear that you're judged based on the amount of revelation you're given. Think how Jesus says to the Chorazin, Sodom and Gomorrah will be worse on the day of judgment than you because someone greater than, I think it's Moses, is here. So you're judged based on what you're revealed. Well, that's so fair too. If you didn't hear about something, you're not judged on that something. And the second thing, it says that not everyone's eternity is the same. Meaning even in hell, it's all bad, right? Because you're out of God's presence. But it's also fairer in that somebody who did really bad things, Sodom and Gomorrah, is going to do somehow better than Chorazin in that day. So I actually think that's a way to appeal to the issue behind the issue, which is it's not just like two buckets, the heaven bucket and the hell bucket. It's actually a fair trial and fair, just consequences, where even in your great white throne judgment, nobody goes, wow, I was treated so unfair. So many times I just tell people, God, the nature of who he is, God can only be who he is. He's always going to treat people fairly.
And the passage, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin, that really speaks to the idea of, man, we're going with what God has laid his law on our conscience. And that's something I've used when I've been witnessing to people on the street, is just simply, hey, have you held up to your own standards? And people will say, no, I haven't. It's like, That's kind of the point. You haven't even held up to your own standard of goodness, let alone God's standard of perfection. And it's a way to show them and bring to light, you know what, you're right. I got to admit, as much as I like to talk about my own goodness, I know the secret stuff. I know the things that I've done, the things that I've thought, the things that I've said that really are not right. So great.
Yeah, I think 20 years ago, people would have said, hey, every time we talk about sin, everybody feels condemned, so don't use the word sin. Now I think in postmodern world, we have the opposite problem, is when you say the word sin, everybody's like, not me. I can think of some serial killer, that must be a sinner. So I actually, instead of using the word sin, which means miss the mark, I actually try and give specifics. I find it so much more helpful. Did you know that being unloving, impatient, lusting after somebody else's wife or daughter, I think getting into those little details takes it out of the religious terminology, and suddenly you're talking specifics. And that's what, again, Romans 1, what does he say? You ever disobeyed your parents? You ever been not wanting to take people's authority, been a controlling person, you ever created division and gossip, and then get into lusting after people. So I think the more specific you get, it's more helpful in convicting the heart than some generic, relatively religious word that our postmodern world has said, not me. So
they do. Everybody does today seem to proclaim themselves and proclaim their own goodness. All right, I got another question that I think has a bad answer. It's almost humorous if it wasn't true. The bad answer that I've actually heard, and actually, Chad, you said you had a story about this, and so I want to hear this story. Were dinosaurs on the ark? And a debate about dinosaurs. I've heard some people give some really bad answers. Bottom line is the bad answer would be no. A worse answer would be, Satan put dinosaur bones here to trick people. That's what the dinosaur bones are really from. They're trying to trick people into believing something that never really happened. So that's a bad answer. You don't want to go there. That really does make Christianity look foolish when you say dinosaurs never existed. Right, Chad?
Yeah, there was a time when I was in high school that I had not researched this on either side. Obviously the young earth has a position where the Bible teaches that, has a great answer for this. And also the progressive creationist has a better answer than what I gave. So I think I would have rather have reached into either of the schools of thought that were out there to give a good answer than what I came up with. Because I was pretty researched on maybe Jesus being God, Jesus being the only way. I think I could have given a good answer. And this is like, I'm a freshman in high school. I could have given a good answer on good works or the Bible's reliability. I had a good friend of mine. He's now a surgeon in Chicago, with one of my best friends, an agnostic. We got talking about this topic, and I just kept throwing out answers, and he just kept rebuttaling them because I just did not have a good answer. I'd really not thought about this before. So finally, as he just really creams me with some piece of data, I said, I don't even believe dinosaurs existed. And I didn't really even mean it, but it was like I was just so frustrated, and I should have just humbly said, I need to go check. I need to go research. That's one of my best friends, though. And so in this kind of stupid moment, I said that. Well, I haven't thought about it in 20 years. I happened to be in Chicago about 15 years ago, and I met up with him, and we just had a great conversation, telling old stories. And he still remembered. He goes, "You're a pastor, huh? You're still telling people dinosaurs don't exist." I'm like, oh. I said, I've got a lot better answers now than I did back then.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I do think that is a bad answer, but that comes to our conclusion in a minute of making something up. If you were just so frustrated, you're just like, you know what? I just don't believe they existed, and making up something. The reality, though, really is fascinating. When you start studying the subject of dinosaurs, it is so interesting. I mean, what kid isn't fascinated by the idea of dinosaurs when major shows, Hollywood productions are now talking, doing lots of stuff with dinosaurs. It's on the public access stations, shows on dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are incredibly popular. Now, I do believe they're being used in a way that's teaching something that's wrong, teaching the idea that evolution did happen and these dinosaurs died 65 million years ago. I think a great answer would be something like this. Well, I actually do believe dinosaurs are on the ark. Hey, did you know they recently discovered red blood cells in dinosaur bones? Now, red blood cells can only last for a maximum of 100,000 years. So if they can only last 100,000 years, how do we still have red blood cells in dinosaur bones when this dinosaur supposedly died 65 million years ago? Don't you find that problematic? And actually, there are 16 different, they call them biochemicals, red blood cells and collagen and different things that they find in dinosaur bones that show these dinosaurs had to die recently. And I mean, where these dinosaur bones are at, they're not in great preservation environments. My son Jordan and I were at the Hell Creek Formation in Montana 2 years ago, and I got to hold some of the dinosaur bones in my own hand that have soft tissue, dinosaur bone that's not fossilized, and parts of it that are fossilized. We were there when it was negative 20 degrees. Yes, I felt like firing my scheduling assistant after that trip. Negative 20 out there. In the summertime, it's over 100. You're talking extreme temperature changes between summer and winter, not ideal conditions to preserve something. And yet here they have preserved soft tissue and preserved cells inside of dinosaur bones. So I think there's a much better answer that can be given that goes along the lines of, well, I think dinosaurs are kind of interesting. Did you know? And give some facts about dinosaurs that bring doubt on the idea of millions of years ago, and then put it inside of the realm of reality. And then if you're going to scripture, you can say, the Bible does say he took 2 of every sort of animal on board the ark. So if he took 2 of every sort of animal, that would have including all, by the way, that's land-dwelling, air-breathing animals. That would have included the dinosaur kind. Here's another piece of information that might help somebody or help you give a good answer. Did you know the average size animal that Noah put on the ark was smaller than a sheep? Even the dinosaurs, I mean, I know we had the big ones, but the little ones were little. So Noah could have taken young ones on the ark, and it would not have been a problem to have dinosaurs on the ark. So I think there's a much better answer than, I don't believe dinosaurs existed. Satan put the bones here to fool us. Chad, you didn't go that far as saying Satan put the bones here to fool us. But
yeah, well, again, I think with Noah, you have several issues too, which is you have a lot of misconceptions about Noah. So now, usually what I do is I start when somebody asks me a question, I ask them like 3 questions because I'm trying to figure out where they are. So if this is not a Christian, I'm not going to get a non-Christian to become a Bible-believing young earth creationist in one step. So I may say, hey, if that's your big question, I might start just working on, can we believe God exists? And I'll say, is this really the number 1 issue that you have? And if it really is, then I'll say, well, because then there's lots of things people attack the ark with, right? How could they all fit there? There's 3 million animals. How could they all fit in this piece? So I actually would start kind of build a case. Let me show you how big this thing was. And then I get into kinds, and guess no one, whether you're a Christian or an agnostic, no one's heard of kinds unless you're a real Bible nerd in the young earth creation. Those of us who've been around are like, oh, of course the Bible teaches kinds, but most people have never even heard of it before. So I'll use that classification scale that you remember from science class, the kingdoms and the this, and say, you remember how things kind of divide up? Imagine that those macro evolution or adaptations came from, and you could get to the class stage, or that's what the Bible calls kinds. And so if you had only 5,000 kinds, you could actually get all the variations we have today. I had a guy ask me that on stage several years ago. He never heard that concept. It was like, huh. Well, I wasn't at dinosaurs yet. The real issue behind the issue is I don't want to be an idiot. Christians are idiots for believing this. So I love your idea. I use that red blood cell argument all the time. Scientists are not idiots do that. Sometimes I'll quote different scientists they already respect. Hey, did you know that Blaise Pascal, or do you know that Pasteur, or do you know the guy who invented astronomy? Do you know that they were Bible-believing Christians? No. And that answers the issue behind the issue, which is you don't have to be an idiot to believe this. Then I'll start building the case as to, you ever heard the story about red blood cells? No. I may not even make a conclusion. I'm just, have you ever heard? I'm going to use questions, the Socratic method the whole time. Isn't that interesting? So I guess if you came across that, what conclusion would you come to? And have you ever heard about kinds and how all the animals that exist today could come from 5,000 different adaptations? No. Did you know the ark is this big? No. So, and I do think, depending on how interested people are and where they're really at, because a lot of times these things are intellectual hurdles for real emotional issues. So I really ask questions as a pastor to find, is this really the issue? Then I do think talking about the size of dinosaurs, those type of things really is helpful for people. And now, you and I may disagree on this one. Sometimes if I've got a real diehard atheist, I may turn them over to a progressive creationist. I think there's huge problems with progressive creationism, putting death before Adam being the biggest one. But if I can use a progressive creationist like Hugh Ross to get people from atheist to there might have been a God, and a smart guy with a degree in astrophysics can believe in God, I might use that early in the stage. I'm going to pretty quickly come back and show other pieces, but I'm really trying to figure out where is somebody, what's their next step. As a Christian, I think there's so many problems with Hugh Ross. And again, I know him personally. He came to my church a couple times when I was a youth pastor, so I didn't invite him, but I got to know him. So I think I'm trying to find the tool to move people forward to where they are and to find out what's the real issue going on here.
Very interesting. And yeah, we talked a little bit about that. And I would call Hugh Ross a friend of mine as well. I remember interviewing him, and just to make sure, I said, hey, would you share with me the gospel? And I'm doing an interview with him. And he shared a beautiful gospel presentation. I thought it was fantastic. And anyway, so I probably won't be giving out any Hugh Ross books. But
well, I give out like one every 3 years, so it's not like
But I see what you're saying as far as how do you get them to the next step? What's the issue behind the issue of where we're trying to get them? Excellent. Hey, and by the way, if you have any comments on this, feel free to chat those in. Josh and the Stallman family say, that's where us ignorant people say, I don't really have a great answer to that, but our friends at Creation Today have some great resources I'd like to share with you. That's awesome. Hey, here's another question that's asked. Hey, why did a bad thing happen to someone? Why did that happen to them? Why did this bad thing happen to this person? And for those of you that have ever experienced, a setback in life or a trial or just a real hardship, and you've experienced the pain of losing someone close to you, or a cancer, or a disaster, a natural disaster, or something like that, you have probably had some well-meaning Christian that's just somehow trying to, I don't know what he's trying to do, but somehow trying to get you to realize how to fix this problem. And they may have said something like, well, that's because you probably have unconfessed sin in your life. That's probably why this is happening. That, my friend, is a really, really bad answer. Really bad. Chad, you've had to deal with people one-on-one during unbelievable tragedies.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've ever heard or seen somebody say that or communicate that, but
without a doubt. Yeah, so I'd say, and when I invite skeptics or agnostics to church, it's the first thing I hit you with is the problem of evil. So I guess there's two issues. There's an intellectual way to approach it, and then there's a personal way to approach it. I think personally, most people are really saying, I'm hurting. So what you think is, oh, they're asking an intellectual question, and I should give an intellectual answer. It's almost like when your wife says, hey, I had a bad day, and you're trying to solve it. How well does that work? So I would start by saying what most people need is comfort, empathy. We need to be Job's friends during their sitting sevens and shut our mouth and just be with people in pain. When Job's friends were silent, they were brilliant. When they opened their mouth, they were, basically taught karma. So I think most of the time what I would advise people to do is be a good listener, sit with people in their pain, and just be a comforter. Now, that's not what this dialogue's about, but I do think if we did that more often than trying to, give some Greek logical explanation, I think would probably help better. However, I also think it's helpful to say that the Bible takes a very nuanced view, or a very complex view maybe, to pain and suffering, which is it's the result of a broken creation. It's not always your fault. Good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. God makes it rain on the just and the unjust, and the most perfect man who ever lived, who did everything right, got crucified and bloodied. So I think another piece is expectation, which is we expect, because the original creation is still on our heart, we expect the world to be good and perfect. It's not. And so we're dealing with that tension. And so I think we can point people back to, why do you think the world should be good and bad things shouldn't happen to good people? If anything, evolution tells us that's exactly what happens. The world beats a snot out of you and you evolve because of it. Way to go. Thank you, world. But we know that's not true. We know it's not true in our head. We know it's not true in our heart. We are longing for this world as if we're comparing this world to some world we once saw and want to see again. Well, now you're talking heart language. Yeah, don't you want there to be a world? Isn't it something wrong with this world that, children would die and that bad things would happen? Why is that? Well, because God didn't make us for a place like that. So I think talking about the broken creation is a way to really get at the heart. But then intellectually, you can add to that. Like, what causes evil according to the Bible? Well, your own actions. There are times you reap and sow. The result of broken creation, Romans 8, creation longs, there's tornadoes, there's acts of God as we call them, but they're not acts of God. We got the world system. We got Satan, who's the prince of the power of the air. We got, I did everything fine, but the drunk driver hit me. It was the results of their brokenness. So I think most Christians think about suffering through the lens of karma.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to talk about that. When you talk about that in your messages, I think it's just exposing a lot of really bad thinking.
Yeah. So I always frame the four worldviews on what causes pain and what's the solution to pain. So here's doctorate level view of philosophy and the intellectual answer. What causes pain? So suffering is your fault. So that's karma, and it's a consistent answer. You caused it. Well, what do I mean? Well, in your last life you caused it, and you got back here. You're going to be crushed by the wheel of karma, and you're going to rebirth, and you'll be better next time. So that's one view. It's a consistent view of karma. Suffering is your fault. Second thing is suffering is an illusion, and that's Buddhism. If you remember the movie The Matrix, there is no spoon. Suffering is caused by your cravings. If you'd stop craving and stop thinking this world is real and realize it's a dream world, and if you can enlighten yourself out of the belief that this is a real world, then that's suffering's an illusion. And that includes Buddhism. It also includes Christian Science. I had a good friend of mine who's a Christian scientist, and it's basically a mixture of Christianity and Buddhism. And so he was talking about his son who had autism as well. And he says, well, there's things that are real, like love and peace and joy, and things that are unreal, like suffering and death. And Mary Baker talks about that in her book. I said, well, let's talk practically about that. So my son has autism. Your son has autism. Is his autism real or fake? And he never really tried to frame his illusion mindset into his reality. Like, this doesn't work. So the third thing is that evil and suffering is normal and natural. And that's what atheism teaches. The world's always been a disaster. It's, as Richard Dawkins says, DNA neither knows nor cares, and we dance to its music. And I'd go right after that and say, really? When I'm holding my grandmother's hand, when I'm holding the hand of a 15-year-old who was playing golf like 15 years ago on the golf course, happened to be a storm, happened to knock over a branch, smashed him in the head, lost half his skull. That's DNA, neither knows nor cares, and I dance to his music. Does that sound right? Does that feel right? But that is the atheist worldview. So the atheist comes at us with evil and suffering, and they've got the worst possible answer, which is this is normal, get used to it. Christianity has a very nuanced view, which is that suffering is caused by a broken creation. Sometimes that includes me. Sometimes it includes the world. Sometimes it includes the drunk driver. And God wants to meet us. He came into this broken creation because he's one day going to fix it. And for now, he's going to offer comfort and meaning and purpose and be with us. And he can even take the bad stuff that happens and work all things together for good. So anyway, I'm going too long, but then there's 4 views of solutions. And the Bible, I'll give you just 2. Atheism says not ever, and Christianity says not yet. We're not ever going to be peace. Good's never going to be rewarded in atheism. Evil's never going to be judged in atheism. Christianity says not yet. It's frustrating. Yes, it's frustrating. The Bible lets you beat on God's chest like Habakkuk in the Lament Psalms, but not yet. The yet is coming, and we have hope.
No, you're not going too long at all. I think that's brilliant. And I think there's probably a lot of you on here that really haven't heard it from that perspective. And probably some of you on here who have even thought, it's almost like it's easy to play that mental game of, and many of you have done it, of, man, I did my devotions, I got a raise that day, I didn't do my devotions, I got in a wreck with my car, and you're correlating all these things and trying to make this huge correlation, like this whole karma game that Chad was talking about, this idea of Christian karma and putting these things together, when I think you're right, it is way, way, way more complicated than that. But I don't think it's wise to chalk God up to a cosmic bully who every once in a while he thumps you on the ear, and then sometimes he gives you mercy instead and grace, and oh, well, this time you're getting the. I don't think it's wise to chalk God up to this guy who's kind of playing games with people's emotions and playing it. So we need to step back and get a bigger picture of who God is. And I thought of it like this, Chad. Maybe you can think through this with me or talk about this with me. Or you can say, Eric, I have no idea what you're talking about. I feel like every time we believe something or have been taught something about God that is not true, the idea that, well, that's what God is doing that to get your attention. God is doing that to you because you didn't, and therefore God, as we do that and we think wrong things about God, I think it has consequences in our life because it trickles down to so many other areas of our life and the way that we think and the way that we operate. Yeah,
I totally agree with that. In fact, one thing, just the idea that we say that, I think it's presumed idolatry because we claim to know what God's doing.
Thank you for joining us for this engaging conversation. To view this and many more conversations in their entirety, we invite you to partner with us at creationtoday.org/partner.